Welcome back to the course. This is Module 3. At this point, we now have a logo at the top of our Microsoft Dynamics 365 instance, and we are ready to begin customization. The very first thing we have to do is catalog the entities that we need to create. There are certain things that simply do not exist in Microsoft Dynamics 365, and before we can begin to customize those entities that already exist, such as contacts that have relationships to things like households, or contacts that have relationships to things like programs or volunteers and things like that. Before we can do any of those things, we have to create those entities. Now, for those of you that are technical out there, an entity is also known as a table in a database, and that's precisely what you're doing when you create entities in Microsoft Dynamics 365. You're actually modifying what we call the schema of the database, of the underlying SQL database. You're creating new tables that will hold new sets of data. It's a very powerful item to have at your disposal, and so we encourage you to use it lightly. And however, this is a step-by-step, so we're just going to go through those steps. We can talk about in different courses perhaps, or through conversation while taking the course, we can talk it through as to when it makes sense to create entities and when it doesn't. So if you remember back to Module 1, we determined that in fact there were one of the most important aspects, programs. And when you think about it, programs is sort of at the very top in a way, I guess you could say. Because programs represent all of the information that neighborhood assistance programs wants to sort of look up to. In other words, there will be things happening at neighborhood assistance programs, and they'll be happening in relationship to a program very often. And that can happen in several levels. And I'll put up a sort of a graphic to explain this. But the idea is that if you have something like, let's say, a person attending a class, well, the person has an attendance to a class. There's a relationship. But we know that the class will need to have a relationship to a specific program, or else neighborhood assistance programs will have a hard time understanding how many classes each program has had and how many people have attended each class, and therefore how many people have attended each program. So all of the information in terms of categorization is revolving around programs. So I think that you could say, especially reflected in the title of the organization, that neighborhood assistance programs is probably one of the most important entities to create. And this is another thing to understand. Because I use the word top, meaning it's at the highest level, that a lot of activity is going to look up to it, it should be virtually the first entity that you create. Because you won't be able to create other entities that look up to it if it doesn't exist. Right? It needs to exist first. It needs to be created first. So we will do that. The way that you do that is relatively simple. In this particular application, you click Settings and you go to Customizations. You'll spend a lot of time in there, and you click Customize the System. This is a point-and-click interface. Microsoft Dynamics 365, as well as Salesforce and others, are very good at removing the obligation to be a programmer. That's one of the key things of this new century in terms of constructing solutions and software, is that you don't have to be the kind of programmer that you had to be maybe 10 years ago.